Pouring of warmth and affection for a son of the South of whom they are proud. And Jimmy Carter went right to his Southern roots to express his gratitude.
You've honored us beyond anything imaginable as I walk the streets of this town to sell boiled peanuts to the merchants in the stores here. And we hope forever to honor you with our lives in the years to come in being great Americans, in being good Georgians, and being good Sumter Countyans, and good residents of Plains, Georgia. God bless you. We love you all.
Mr. Carter said the day had been emotional but not sad, and happiness comes in the morning with a flight to Germany. Lee Thornton, CBS News, Plains, Georgia.
In the birthplace of the American president's great-grandfather in Ireland, they renamed the only pub the Ronald Reagan, and they danced in the town's two streets. In one of his first official acts, President Reagan formally nominated his cabinet and cabinet-level aides. The Senate went into session at mid-afternoon to consider their confirmation. Fairly quickly, Caspar Weinberger was confirmed as Secretary of Defense, and then the Senate turned to the more controversial nomination of General Alexander Haig to be Secretary of State. But no vote was expected on that before tomorrow. Wall Street traders saw little in the president's inaugural speech to encourage hope of quick economic improvement. The market was down sharply in active trading. When Iranians in Tehran and Americans in Algiers initialed the final agreement early Monday, it was believed the deed was done, but the hostage release was just hours away. Indeed, the Iranians said that. And then a hitch developed, one that was to leave the world on tenterhooks another 24 hours. Whose fault was that? Well, it seems that both sides knew there was to be an addendum to the main agreement spelling out the amount of Iran's frozen assets. But when that addendum reached Iran, the terms were not what the Iranians have been led to believe they were going to be. Steve Young has details.
CBS News has learned that the addendum was expected by the Iranians and had been seen by their London lawyers. But the Iranian officials did not expect that they would have to accept the dollar figures listed by the U.S. banks holding frozen Iranian assets as accurate or complete. They were especially enraged by a clause preventing Iran from negotiating for additional assets if any were located after the hostages were released. That's when the Iranians balked. At about the same time, the State Department was saying, there isn't a problem, just a process. At that point, the White House reached outside the U.S. government and called an American expert in international negotiating for help in locating the difficulty. The expert, in touch with Washington and Tehran, has told CBS News he explained to the U.S. government the Iranians thought the U.S. banks were making a last-minute bid to limit what they'd have to return to Iran. The expert told the government he agreed. An American banking source told CBS News both sides were getting increasingly paranoid, adding it was much ado about nothing. The banking source said U.S. banks were taking heat and didn't want to be blamed for preventing the release of the hostages. So the standoff ended about 16 hours after it began when the U.S. banks backed down. At about 4:15 this morning, Treasury Secretary William Miller said, do it. And the American banks released the frozen Iranian assets. Steve Young, CBS News, New York.
The stop for the hostages in Algiers later tonight seems only appropriate, since that's where much of the work was done that resulted in the Americans' freedom. David Culhane is there.
As the day began in Algiers, there was considerable anxiety that the entire deal to free the hostages might still fall through. American negotiator Warren Christopher and Algerian diplomats had spent another virtually sleepless night trying to iron out one more set of difficulties raised by the suspicions of Iranian leaders. All through the day, the Americans here refused to say whether agreement had been reached. But finally, the American embassy broke its rigid no-comment rule and passed the champagne.
Help yourselves, help yourselves. This is for you.
And American military aircraft arrived from Germany to take the hostages to Frankfurt. But there was one more ironic turn as preparations were made to celebrate the arrival of the freed American prisoners at Algiers airport. A plane flew in, not the aircraft bearing the Americans, but an Air Iran jet carrying a crowd of Iranian parliamentary leaders, apparently here on entirely separate business. One last bizarre episode to mark the day Iran finally let the hostages go free. David Culhane, CBS News, Algiers.
There is still one more American left behind in a Tehran jail. Her case unrelated to the hostages, Cynthia Dwyer, a freelance writer, was imprisoned last May. The State Department says it still doesn't know why, but it's confident that a way will be found to free her too. Many of the hostage families, remembering so many dashed hopes, maintained they would believe the hostages were free only when their planes landed in West Germany. The freed Americans haven't arrived there yet, but most of the families are willing to concede anyway that this time it really has happened, and they celebrate it. Ed Rabel reports.
Marine Sergeant John McKeel's parents took the State Department call at home in Balch Springs, Texas.
You can take it officially that they are gone from Iran. Yay!
Barry Rosen's wife and children were at home in Brooklyn.
What'd we just find out? That what? Please tell us.
Daddy's coming home.
Hooray! Yes.
In Tampa, Catherine Koeb's parents went right out and replaced the now tattered American flag that had been put up the day the ordeal began. The agony, the frustration of not knowing, 444 days of it finally really had ended.
I've waited 444 days. Just great.
I felt none of the joy or the jubilation that I felt the other night. I just feel total relief. Thank God. They're in the air. They're free.
Virgil.
And that's the way it is. Tuesday, January 20th, 1981. A day that began as the 444th day of captivity and ended as the first day of freedom for the American hostages in Iran. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, reporting from Washington. Good night.
Special report. Free. Here from New York is Dan Rather.
Good evening. As Martin Luther King once said in another context, free, free, great God Almighty, free at last. The hostages are out. They have had a refueling stop in Athens, Greece. The hostage aircraft are now nearing Algiers, Algeria. Standing by in Algiers is CBS News correspondent John Blackstone.
Dan, the plane has just landed here at the Boumediene Airport in Algiers. We can't see it clearly yet. It should be the first of the two hostage planes we expect to land here tonight. Just as the plane landed, it began to pour rain here in Algiers. It's windy and cool for this, what is actually the second stop on the road to freedom for the 52. We can now see the plane. It's just taxiing up to the VIP reception room here, reception hall, in fact, at the Algiers airport. It's just passing out of our sight now. Just passing out of our sight behind another aircraft. Just see the lights there. There's been very tight security here at the airport in anticipation of the arrival. The route that the hostages are, now the former hostages are likely to take into this VIP reception room is lined with Algerian police officers every few feet. There are no members of the public here, actually. Large crowd of press. However, held back behind barriers and behind policemen. We're still waiting to get our first good look at that aircraft. Just now taxiing past a few others sitting on the at the airport.
John Blackstone,
Yes.
Dan Rather in New York. Have you had any word in Algiers as to the condition of the 52 hostages?
We haven't at all. As has been the style throughout the negotiations here in Algiers, we haven't really been told anything about what's going on, and in fact, we have no idea exactly what's going to happen here at the airport tonight. We suspect that the hostages, the former hostages, will come off the aircraft and will go into the